It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen. Happy New Year. Happy to be back with you, breaking down some football film, Logan. Even if it is the, what number are we on? 7th straight loss for the Commanders? Yikes.
Is that it? Yeah,
so.
I mean, not great. It's getting harder and harder to watch these games in review because I think we all know that there's going to be some pretty big changes coming up. But it is always, I'm a football junkie. I can't help myself. So
no doubt. Something that we should do on Thursday. This is always fun when we plan our future pods in the middle of the current pod. But we should take a look. Ben Standig did a really nice list of some front office folks that are on the radar. And I think talking about organizational structure and talking about some of those names is something that we can definitely try to hit on later this week. As for now, though, we do dive into the tape, and that's going to put Sam Howell in focus. But before we get specific to this game, Logan, I think it'd be good to zoom out a little bit in looking at the comments and such of our instant reaction show. It does seem that some folks, this is going to sound harsh, but some folks don't understand the time continuum. They don't understand how time works, and that as it goes, you get more data and more information, and that should change how you view things. And I will say that is something that different sectors of society value differently. Some people are like, once you have an opinion, you must stick to it despite all available information. Skip Bayless has made a career out of saying that LeBron James is just not that good at basketball. All right, man.
You got to do what you got to do. You know?
Good for, hey, it's been great for his wallet, his integrity, his, intelligent people thinking that he's actually intelligent and worth listening to. Maybe different story, but that dude has made a lot of money. So I guess good for him. I prefer people who are willing to take things as they come, willing to admit they don't necessarily know things along the way, and then ultimately, make decision when there's enough data and still be willing to change if more data emerges that pushes something different. That is very highfalutin language to say. We have been pretty consistent all year saying like, hey, Sam is here now, but there's a long way to go and we need to see more. After the game on Sunday, you were more definitive than I think you have been at any point where you're just like, hey, this kind of cements Sam Howell as a backup in my mind.
Yeah.
Why now for being that level of definitive, and how do you kind of explain your thought process throughout the year as an evaluator?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this really interesting talent evaluation is always interesting, and I think it's really hard with the quarterback position specifically, and especially a young quarterback. And when you're looking at Sam, I think he does some stuff that's high level. And I think when you look early in the year, and we talked about this a lot, when he's hitting all these big time throws and he's elevating the offense and his ability to extend plays, and you're like, there is something here. There is a talent, there's an ability, there's a physical skill set that gets excited, and the moment doesn't seem too big for him, and it seems like he's got it, right? But you want to see how that goes, right? Because anytime you're doing statistics, the more data you can gather, the better, right? So earlier in the year, you're not playing against the best defenses of all time. You're kind of working through some stuff where he'd play a good defense, he'd look like he'd regressed, and he'd come back the next week and play a little bit better. And then now I think, I have a rule of thumb. Like if you can get 7 games of evaluation on a quarterback, it basically takes 7 games for the defense to understand what a quarterback is. And I feel like kind of right around that 7-game mark, like that's when Sam really started hitting the skids a little bit, having a really hard time in terms of what was going on. I go back to that Cowboys game, and I know statistically he was very productive, but I think you kind of felt that the moment was starting to get too big for him. And then he goes on a little bit of a slide. I think you could even go back to the second New York Giants game, just didn't really settle in. I'm trying to look up his stats right now for that game specifically. But then you get Miami, struggled again. He did some good things, but extending plays, working off schedule, you can't live in that. You can't live doing that. And then, going out to LA, struggled there, right? The game against the 49ers, I think he struggled there again too. And it's the same kind of issues popping up. And so the more, and during this time period, I've watched more quarterbacks. I've watched Tua, I watched Stafford, I watched, Brock Purdy, and you see kind of how the throws that they are making, the tight windows that they're maximizing, the anticipation that they're using. And you're like, Sam does not do these things. I don't want to say at all, but it's very, 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 very rare to see them. And those things, those skill sets are very hard to develop. And so when he's making the big time throws, when he's extending and making plays and that elevate the offense, you say, okay, you can live with that. But when that stops and when that dries up, you see what the offense and this team becomes. And that's just not a tenable solution long term. Because I think, we mentioned O'Connell, the kid in Las Vegas. Like he'll have games where you're like, wow, look at this big time throw. Look at this. And then he'll have games where he throws 4 picks. And I think it's emphatic that he's not a starter in the NFL. Like he's a good backup quarterback, right? He's not a guy you can build around. Browning in Cincinnati had 3 or 4 games where he looked amazing, then comes back to earth. Like that's the nature of a backup quarterback in the NFL, is they can give you something high level for a short period of time, but when it gets tight, when the situation gets hot, they don't have it. And I understand. I can hear everyone now. He's a young football player, but with the regime change imminent, he has not shown you enough to be like, we can build around him the way that Philadelphia built around Jalen Hurts, for example. And I think that's the thing. That's what I come back to, is like, maybe if Ron was here for another year, you could say, okay, he can develop, he can grow. There's a staff that trusts and understand what he's doing, but that's not the case here. And I think they're gonna make a decision again for the franchise in terms of finding a guy that they believe that can handle the responsibilities of that position long term.
So a couple of different things. I think one, the most important thing you said there for like understanding purposes is what a backup is, which is not someone who can't play.
Right.
Like backup quarterbacks in the NFL are really good relative to guys who are like non-league players, right? Like occasionally you get a guy who comes in and you're like, that dude is not an NFL player. And it doesn't happen often at the quarterback position due to the nature of it. Like typically the starter plays the whole year. If you get one injury, okay. Sometimes you get down to the 4th guy or 3rd guy. And even then, like, Tommy DeVito's fine for a couple of weeks. Right. But eventually you're like, nope, that dude is not an NFL starter. But every 2 or 3 times a year, maybe you get a guy who gets called up and you're just like, nope, not an NFL player. And that's when you see like the difference in that and a backup. Maybe the ultimate example of this, we were trying to think of this before the show, and we threw out a bunch of different guys who are like kind of backups that have done, if they play a whole season, like you can maybe win 8 games with them even. Right. Jameis Winston's kind of the high-end version of that, where he has the 30 touchdown, 30 pick year in Tampa, but then he has a great fit with Sean Payton, and they have a really great year in New Orleans. And could Sam be that in the same way that like Baker's having a great year down in Tampa, but like still his great year is 8 wins. The ultimate example to me, and I'm curious what you think of this, is Nick Foles. Like Nick Foles won a Super Bowl, right? Nick Foles won a freaking Super Bowl because he got hot at the right time,
exactly,
in the right system with the right guys around him. And so, yes, you can win with a quote-unquote backup quarterback, but then you see a couple other teams try to build around Nick Foles, and it doesn't work, and he's out of the league. Right. And so I think that's kind of what we're saying here, is like a true starting quarterback that you feel good about is a guy that will give you it's not about how good is your good, it's about how consistently can you produce it. And I think where we are at right now with Sam Howell is we don't have a trust that week in, week out against any opponent you can trust him. Right now, his performance is correlated to how good the defense he is playing against is. And if it's a good defense, he's going to have a mediocre to bad performance. And if it's a bad defense, he can probably light him up for 300 yards. But that's not an NFL starter. Now, it's worth pointing out, Sam is young. He's 23. This is his 2nd system in 2 years, his 1st year in this system. He works his butt off. He's got great character. And I think those are the things that earlier in the year when we talk about why – I mean, I said on the radio multiple times, like I would bet on Sam Howell being the guy moving forward. Like I think that he's going to be the guy. And I think what happened was I looked at the character, I looked at the mental makeup,
Me too.
I looked at the maturity, I looked at the big time plays he made, and I go, that stuff you can't coach. I think the other stuff, the timing, the rhythm, the footwork is stuff that you can coach. And well, I still think that's true to an extent. It is really hard to get that stuff. Like it's kind of innate in a lot of levels. And he just hasn't improved in those areas. So you're projecting, saying the good is going to stay good, the bad is going to get better. And if the bad doesn't get better, well, that changes the projection. And now with the year's worth of starts under his belt, he got 17, the Dallas game last year, 16 this year. I think we're at a point where you go, okay, at the very least right now, this dude's a backup, someone who can play well on any given weekend, but is not to be trusted long-term. But he's more than likely, based off of who he's been his entire career, not just in the pros, but in college, what the scouting report is. Maybe this is confirmation bias, but the stuff that you had worries about, the stuff that made him a 5th-round pick, and save your comments about how he was the #1 guy before his final year at Carolina. He was a 5th-round pick. That's where the league said that he was. Anybody could have gotten him in the first 4 rounds. And, that stuff hasn't improved to a level to kind of change his long-term prognosis. I think he can be a very good backup. And I think that if we lived in an alternate universe where you could give him 2 years to continue to develop, could he be a starter, middle of the pack, type of starter? Probably. But if you can go get Caleb Williams, Jalen Daniels, Drake May, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, whoever it is that you wind up liking at the #2 pick, or if you want to trade down, whatever, why would you wait on that? And that's kind of the way the league operates now.
Yeah. I think Geno Smith is a perfect case study for that. He came out, showed some ability early in his career, had to go to the bench. They drafted, I think, Mark Sanchez afterwards, right? Very high. And then,
I
whatever
think the
that
timelines
order
are
is.
backwards on that.
Yeah, whatever. But they moved on, whatever it was. They moved on from him. He sits for a couple of years and gets an opportunity in Seattle. And I definitely think that's on the table for him. But I think it just, again, the stuff that's very was raw in college is like the anticipation, the accuracy, the ability to operate in the timing of the offense is something else that shows up all the time with him. And the young quarterbacks have a hard time with it. And this is something that I think is really an interesting thought experiment about like being able to sit a quarterback for a couple of years. Like I look at Mahomes and how successful he was. Like it's an important variable. If you're going to like develop that guy, like you just need to give them time and opportunity. And obviously Sam didn't get that. And people can talk about, is it fair? Is it fair that the situation Sam was put in? And it's not. But ultimately, like this is how it goes. Like I remember having a conversation with Rex Grossman about kind of how he stumbled early in his career. And then it took so long for him to get back to have the starting opportunity. And he's like, was it fair? No, but like that's just how the league is. Like you need some level of certainty, and you also need some level of investment from the organization. So I always think like if he was a 1st-round pick, maybe you sitting with him, you say, okay, we got to make it work. Like we've made this investment in him, kind of like they did with Dwayne. Like it was very clear early Dwayne was struggling with some stuff, but he's a 1st-round pick, so they gave him more opportunities. Same thing with Robert. Robert obviously had that tremendous year, but when the struggles came, they were invested in him. And I think being a 5th-round pick, just they're not financially, or there's no draft capital in him. So now the new franchise, draft a guy, and then you're tied to that guy for a couple of years. And it might not be the right fit. It might not be the right. I'm not saying they're going to hit on the pick. Ideally, you'd want that. But it's the logistics and the business side of the NFL, I think, at play here also in terms of Sam and his development, what he's shown this year. Because like earlier in the year, like he was going to have to play very, very well in order for them to kind of say, oh, we can build around him in 2024. But and he showed flashes of that. But I'm just looking at this sheet here, right? Like he played against Philly twice, and they're struggling defensively. They've struggled the whole year. But the second you play the Bills, you play the Giants, when you play the Bears, like defenses that are a little bit more consistent, the Giants again, the Commanders, the Cowboys, the Rams, the Jets, and the 49ers, he has a grade below 50 in all those games, all of them, right? And so to me, that makes a lot of sense that he's not, again, as much as the good was good, the bad was also very bad. And I think you kind of settle on this thing where he's kind of in the middle someplace. And that's kind of, to your point, Craig, like it's not saying he's a bad football player. It's not saying he's a bad guy. It's not saying he doesn't have the skills and the ability to do something special down the road, but he's not there right now. And the organization's not going to invest in it. And I think that's another thing fans need to understand. Like there's a lot of really good football players in the league who just didn't hit for him at the right time. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at with Sam, unfortunately for Sam.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well put. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a young kid who's worked really hard, has been given a test that we have outlined ad nauseum, is way too hard for him to reasonably pass. He has continued to be an amazing teammate throughout. I mean, that is one thing that I will say on the positive side for Sam is like his teammates love him. Yeah. And like the O-line, who he has made look bad at times and has taken a lot of heat because of the way he plays, loves that kid. And I think there's something to say for that, what might be said is like, you can trust him to be your backup. He's not going to sabotage. He's not going to be a bad soldier in the whatever. Like he's someone you can trust, and he's going to go out and support whoever is in the quarterback room with him next year, if that's Caleb Williams or Drake May or whoever. And that's great. That speaks highly of Sam as a human being. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that he's the guy that you should build around. At the same token, I will say this last thing real quick before we get into the actual tape from Sunday. If they decide they don't really like any of these quarterbacks, if the new regime gets in and goes, we can't pass up on Olu Fashanu or Marvin Harrison or Joe Alt or whoever, because I think that guy's going, the non-quarterback is going to go to the Hall of Fame. And I don't think this guy we're going to draft is going to be any better than Sam Howell. You could start with Sam Howell and not be dead in the water. Like, you can have the bridge guy, like other organizations have done, and hope that, you build up a good enough roster. And this is, again, a project we're going to embark on this offseason, is like, look at how some of the best organizations have built it. And you could probably be somewhat competitive next year, depending on how good your coaching is and how well you do in the rest of the draft and free agency and all of that. If you're talking about like a viable chance to build a long-term contender, which is Josh Harris's stated goal, like, you're eventually going to need to do something about the position.
Well, also, I just think it goes back to this conversation we've had ad nauseum. And when Jared Goff left LA, I think a lot of people thought he was cooked and he was the bridge guy, but he got in a system with a coordinator, with skill position guys, and an offensive line and a defense that elevated him. And I think there is a situation where you say, hey, we get a left tackle, we're able to move, or a right tackle, we're able to move Wiley into guard, and all of a sudden the offensive line looks really dynamic. You get guys who are competitive and physical at 3 of 4 spots or 3 of 5 spots. And you say, oh, well, we can draft a receiver in the second round. We got 2 second-round picks. And you kind of build that up. You say, oh, we get a corner in the second round with that second pick. And you're like, okay, all of a sudden there's something going on here that you feel pretty good about. And I
fill out a lot of stuff with your $80 million of cap space.
Right. You go sign a pass rusher that you feel good about. Right. And I look at Philly, and when again, Jalen Hurts was there, or I look at San Francisco when Brock Purdy came in, like, they were system quarterbacks that everyone thought was going to be a bridge, but the system and the personnel around them elevated. And it allowed them, like, I think Joe Flacco is another great example of this. Shoot, Russell Wilson's a great example of this. Yeah. Great defense, great rushing attacks. It lets you sit and kind of chill for a year or two as a quarterback. And then all of a sudden the paradigm shifts at the position, and you say, oh, like, he's developed, he's grown up. He's all the stuff we talked about in the Take 5 in terms of adding information to the CPU, instead of doing it 50 times every game over the course of like your rookie season, essentially. It's like, we've brought that way down. We're going to let you learn and let you develop. And then once you're kind of more established, like, look at Brock Purdy last year to this year. Last year, definitively a system quarterback. This year, elevating that offense. And I think that is something that I think can definitely happen with Sam. I think it happened with a lot of guys.
Yeah, but that's the best case scenario.
It takes a lot. It's going to take a lot. And so what did we just talk about there? Getting more playmakers, getting a more, I don't want to say a better system, because I think this system's fine. I think EB is a smart guy, but something that, again, is going to deleverage him, improving the defense. Like, it just becomes a little bit more complicated, as opposed to finding Joe Burrow, where you have maybe the worst O-line in football as a rookie, but you get the Chase in his second year, Jamar Chase in his second year, and all of a sudden it's one of the most explosive offenses in football. Like, that's the stepping stones there are much shorter, and it's much more direct. I think it's harder to find that one guy. But again, that's kind of what we're talking about here from a team building standpoint. So I think you bring up a great point. Like, maybe the kid, Drake May, is not the guy. Maybe they don't love him. Maybe he botches an interview. Maybe whatever. It's not good. And they can't trade up to get the number 1 pick, and because Caleb Williams is their guy. Take an offensive lineman. Maybe you take a quarterback in the second round. Whatever it is. But there are many ways to build this team. And I think this is, in some ways, an endorsement of Sam. I think he's talented enough to do some of the things we're talking about in terms of being this bridge guy that could develop. But there's a lot of pieces that need to fall in place in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I think what we can definitively say after watching this game and kind of watching the entire season is, like, that's the best case scenario for him. This is not someone where you walk into the offseason going, we're set at quarterback. And that's kind of, I think, what we mean by cemented as a backup or a bridge guy or whatever term you want to use for that. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. We are doing the Take Command pregame show one more time. It will be at 1 o'clock on Sunday, thanks to the 425 start. That is 425 on Fox on your television. I'd imagine they'll get the A crew, by the way. Poor Kevin Burkhardt and Greg Olson are going to have to make a trip to Washington to FedEx because it's the Cowboys and the NFC East is on the line. You know, Fox is sending those guys.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
But anyway, we'll be on your radio while they're on your TV. 1 o'clock is when the Take Command pregame show will start on Sunday. You can check us out live at Tap Sports Bar, which also means, Logan, we get to watch all the 1 o'clock games as we broadcast. We get to be incredibly distracted, which is very, very fun. All right, let's get into the take.
That makes it better. It does make it better.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a longer day, but at least we get to watch a ton of football. All right, let's get into the tape from Sunday. Commanders obviously lose the game to the San Francisco 49ers. It is a game where they were very competitive for 3 quarters. The doors kind of come off in the fourth. Sam throws 2 picks. And can we start with actually the first pick? There's obviously a lot more to talk about. But I think that play is so fascinating because when we talk about play calling and, your pre-snap stuff and kind of understanding what needs to happen, one of the things that I said on Sunday, which I still agree with past me, is like, I at least like compared to what he had been doing the previous 3 weeks, his 3 worst games of the season, that he hit it. He knew there was, cover 0 coming. He hit his back foot and he got that ball out. But there's not really a good place for him to go with the football. And I just kind of wonder too, from like a play calling or an ability to audible, an ability to read pre-snap and realize you probably should go to something else. Like, what do you make of the call, the decision, the process, how it all comes together? Because I think that could be a really illustrative play of kind of where Sam is and where this offense is and how it all fits together.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting play because I think when you first turn it on, you're kind of like, man, there's not a lot of opportunity. They're basically running like what I would call a flag or version of flag. So they're running like a 5-yard out by Terry that's coming back to the ball, like a swirl maybe. Some people call it a squirrel, whatever you want to call it. And then you got a corner by the tight end. So a high-low concept, which is good for versus cover 2. And then on the backside, you basically got like some version of Skinner or All Go where you get like a guy coming across and then guy run like a skinny post basically. And so initially when you watch the play, you're like this is tough because they're bringing double A gap pressure. It ends up being like essentially a 0 look. They're manned up across the back end. And I don't hate the decision by Sam to throw the ball to Terry, but it doesn't look like Terry and he are on the same page or the ball placement isn't exactly right. Like if you're going to do that, let's get the ball a little bit farther outside. But then I think back to, again, when you watch a lot of quarterback plays, you get a lot of opportunity to watch some really good players. And so Matt Stafford, I think they were playing Baltimore and it's 0 and he knows it's 0. And so you see him take a deeper drop. He feathers back and throws the corner in this look. It's not exactly the same route distribution, but basically throws the ball to the back pylon and just says, my guy's going to run under it and catch it or no one's going to catch it. And he throws it to Cooper Kupp for a touchdown. And I think like that to me is when we talk about adding stuff to the CPU is stuff that Matt Stafford has learned over a 15-year career. And he's extremely physically talented and he can make that throw. That to me kind of encapsulates kind of what we're talking about. It's like, yeah, like you understand the basics. The ball needs to get out, right? This is the route. This is probably my most likely hot throw. But
right, it's man, I'm going to throw to Terry.
Right. But I think understanding kind of the concept, how I can help mitigate the rush by feathering away from where I'm weak in the protection. I think is that kind of the next step stuff that a guy like Joe Flacco didn't really have to do a ton of when he was a rookie with the Ravens because they ran the ball 30 times a game, right? Like they de-leveraged him in that way. And so I think like when I look at that play, I think that's kind of like what one element of what we're talking about. It's not the arm talent. It's not the release. It's not even the understanding. It's just that next level of football that takes that from an interception. Like even if he puts that ball out to the sideline to Terry, like I'm okay with that too, because you're understanding like where the DB's leveraged on the receiver, where my receiver has the advantage. If it's incomplete, it's okay, man. It's 3rd and 8. We'll kick a field goal. And instead, you turn it over there to an offense that's playing really good football and playing very consistent football in the 49ers. And you know you're probably not going to get the ball back. So to me, that's kind of what I took from that is like lose a little bit of ground, do that classic Patrick Mahomes, backpedal away, put that sucker up with a high arc before the guy's even out, and hopefully Logan Thomas can make a play for you. And I think that kind of, again, encapsulates what's some of the issues with Sam, and so does the second pick, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, just real quickly on that first one, like, is that also a scenario where a veteran quarterback just gets out of the play and is like, I need to get myself a hot, I need to tell, instead of having my running back stay in, like, I'm just going to send him to the flat and I'm going to flare this ball out and hope he can make a play. But at the very least, I have something quick, because the play itself is very long developing. You have a multi-point route, if you will, with Terry. Like, even your shorter route, Terry's got to go out then in. Right. Everything else is vertical down the field. So that's a pretty rough call against zero. And whether that's EB should have called something different, or, and not, like, this is not me being critical, I'm genuinely asking, or is it something where Sam should be able to see that, and does he have the power to audible out of that, or is the play fine as is, assuming it's zero when snapped, and the only and the correct solution is to just give your guy a shot on the corner?
I mean, I think that it'd be interesting to see how they coach it, for sure. And I think one of the things is people have this understanding or this perception that all quarterbacks kind of do whatever they want at the line of scrimmage.
Right.
That's not the case, right? So unless you've got that called, unless you've alerted that, I guess maybe is the way I'd say it, unless you've discussed what your zero solution is in the week, he's not going to go up there and just be like, oh, hey, I don't like this, let's run slants or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I think that's maybe something to look at from like an offensive coordinator. And that's how I try to look at that play, is what are his answers versus zero? And to me, it's the corner. And is that a high percentage throw? If you're Matt Stafford, yeah, it is a pretty high percentage throw, because he hits it every single week, right? And that's why people don't do zero that much against him, because he's a baller, right?
Right.
But if you're Sam, is that a high percentage throw? And could I give him more opportunity to kind of, again, do the stuff you're talking about? Maybe we check to a screen. Maybe we check to something else, right? Maybe we check to a 70 protection where the tight end stays in and we're good, and Terry really runs a true isolation route. Like, again, like, that's hard stuff to do. It has to be done in the week. And it's kind of something we've talked about before. Is Sam ready for that? Is EB just feeling like you should be able to hit this corner because Patrick Mahomes can hit the corner? Like, those are the types of questions that come up in that play. And again, sometimes the defense just gets you, quite honestly. Like, they've been pretty consistent about running this Tampa 2 coverage in the red zone. That backside 2-man post would absolutely murder that, but they don't, right? They run cover zero, and you're in a bad spot. And I've been on offenses where that's happened, and the coach comes in the meeting and says, that's on me, it's a bad play call, right? But I look at Sam and I say, well, we're talking about Sam's development here. And I say, if I'm a coach, I'm assuming that corner is the hot option there. If I was putting money on it, but again, like, I'm not in the room, I'm not in the install, so I don't know for sure.
Gotcha. All right. Overall, big picture thoughts on Sam, had the performance over the course of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people come out of this and say, oh, well, look, he hits this explosive to Terry, he throws a touchdown to Terry. And I get that. I understand. Like, I was excited about it too. But, and again, like, let's talk about the first completion of Terry, because I think there's a lot of value there, right? He gets the line of scrimmage. He checks the play. It's 3-by-1. Great job formationing at EB to get Terry as kind of your man-beating person in this look, right? Good job. Excellent job across the board. Sam gets it. They bring a little bit of pressure. He is very composed, puts a beautiful ball out there. Great job. Love that. Love that he checked to it. Love that he identified man. Love that he found his best matchup. Love that the formation is positioned in a way where Terry's going to run that man-beating route. Great job. However, man coverages in the NFL on that concept, like, people should be able to make that throw, I think is my thought. And Sam has shown an ability over the course of the year to make that throw. The thing that Sam struggles with is when it's zone coverages, it's this weird amorphous match coverage, and I have to read something out, or I have to manipulate a hook player with my eyes and hit the dig or hit the sit. Like, that's where Sam has struggled. Like, he's been excellent with the quick game. He's been excellent with the shot plays for the most part, right? It's the kind of the middle of the field, minutia quarterback play that's been very challenging. And again, we can talk about whether that's fair or not to put that all on his plate, but that's where he struggled. So when Sam hits that throw, I'm like, I have every expectation that Sam and 32 other quarterbacks in the NFL make that throw, quite honestly. Like, that's just how I feel about the play. It's a great play, but that's playing quarterback in the NFL. The throw to Terry in the end zone, I love it, right? They're playing this kind of it's like a lurk coverage. The safety's pushing to the 3-by-1. They move the back across the formation and across protection. So everybody's over there. Terry's by himself in a one-on-one. Love the back shoulder. Love that that's completed. Again, that's my expectation is that most quarterbacks in the NFL make that throw, and Terry makes a play for you. So I don't want to diminish how good that play was.
I think that's good to show, because a couple, like for the previous 3 weeks, he wasn't even doing that.
Correct.
And so like when we talk about, is he cooked? Like, nah, he's still kicking.
Yeah, no. I think that's right. It's good stuff, right? That's good. But again, in terms of like saying, oh, this shows that Sam deserves to be starting in the NFL.
Right.
I'm not on that boat. Right. And so then you get to like the second interception. And this is, again, where it's like, it's not all on Sam. And I want to make that very clear. Like you just said, we're not sure about the play call in the red zone, because we're not in the meeting. We don't know what the answers are. Sam might've messed it up. Like I had a conversation with Ron a couple of weeks ago about something, and they were just saying, oh, like, yeah, we didn't check to the right thing. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we were like cooking this guy because of this thing we thought. And then it actually turns out that they wanted to do that thing, but we just didn't get the check called, or the guy didn't hear the check. And I just like, that's kind of the minutia of playing football. So that play, there might've been answers. Right. Sam might have not got to it, whatever it is. But then there's the second interception. Like Jahan, our guy, has been, I think, had a pretty solid game to this point. They're running what I call attack, or what Kyle calls attack, which is basically 4 10-yard stops. And it's a really good play because if it's zone, you can kind of manipulate hook players and get the ball where you need to get it. It looks like it's man coverage. I'm going to work the isolation route with Jahan. Jahan does a pretty good job on the release. On the comeback, or the coming back to the quarterback part, the guy grabs him. Sam pulls the ball down and then tries to work back to Curtis super late in the down, and there's an interception. And I look at that and I say, probably a more experienced quarterback throws that ball anyway and draws the PI, right? Because it's all tangled up. Right. And I also think you got to understand that, like, I can't work. So basically, Jahan's on the left, tight end's over the ball, Curtis is on the far side. I can't work.
It was Pringle, not Curtis, but
yeah, sorry. Yeah, Pringle. Yeah. I can't work all the way back to that player. It's not going to time up effectively. And so, again, I think Jahan could have been better there. I think a more experienced player just lets that ball rip, even if it's out of bounds, just to draw the PI, because you see quarterbacks do that all the time. And then I think understanding that I can't be that late back to that, and I got to find the back and the check down is probably, again, it just shows where he's at in terms of that minutia quarterback stuff. And again, he looks a little bit overwhelmed at times. And is it entirely his fault? Let me just say this again for people at home who are listening. No, there's a lot of things going into this, but like ultimately he throws a pick on doing something he shouldn't do. And I think that kind of shows his game a little bit, right? He has another nice completion to Curtis Samuel on like a corner route. Love how he's kind of layered in there. But yeah, that's kind of his game to me in a nutshell. It's 2 plays where it's like, could it have been more supported? Probably. But the 2 throws he does make are throws I expect him to make. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, that's also for those listening in the car or wherever else you're listening, not just those listening at home. That was a lesson for everybody. You said people listening at home, and now
everybody, cars, cars, the whole thing.
I'm trying to be inclusive, Logan. Trying to bring some levity.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe that was a poor decision by me. Anyway,
I'm sorry. My phone's blowing up right now for some reason, so I had to put it on focus mode. Nothing major happened, did it? Like, no. It's just
we don't have any breaking news in the middle of the podcast.
No, just from my other show. Everyone wants to give feedback on that show, so we're gonna wait on that. Yeah.
All right, we're tough for them. You're doing this show now, and there's your levity.
Yeah.
Point is, Sam's got to continue to grow if he's going to be a successful player in this league, and you can kind of see it in this game. But I think most importantly, you see, like, for him long term, like, you see that he's not ruined forever. Like, he came back, he looked from a demeanor standpoint, a confidence standpoint, like the guy we saw earlier this year. Unfortunately, by week 17, we don't want to see the guy we saw week 7 or whatever, week pick your one earlier this week where he's up and down. And you were talking about the resiliency. Like, we want to see some growth. And I don't think we've necessarily seen that growth, which leads us to the final question for the season, if you will, is like, if you're Ron and Jacoby's hamstring is fine, Ron left open the opportunity or the possibility to go back to Jacoby. would you do that? Would you just be like, hey, no, Sam showed that he's playable. Like we should let him finish out the season.
Yeah, I don't really know what I would do. I don't know. This feels like there's an interpersonal like kind of relationship thing happening here. Like I feel like in a weird way, Jacoby deserved to start this game. You know,
I agree with you. Like, I don't know whether that would be enough. Like, Jacoby, let me put it this way: Jacoby deserves to get a start for how incredible he's been behind the scenes all year. I don't know whether that's enough to actually let him start because there's other factors at play that might be more important, such as getting Howell another game of experience and his third time going against the same opponent twice. Like, that's a skill, the divisional opponent thing in the NFL. And like, can he show that he can adjust to a defense that he's seen before in the same way that defenses have adjusted to him? Like, I'd probably just start Sam. But I also get the Jacoby thing.
Yeah. And I think that's where I'm kind of on the fence is like, does it really matter who starts? Like, probably not. Right.
It matters a relative term here at this point.
Yeah. Right. But I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm just saying like, if Sam starts, like, great, he's building experience, but kind of to what end, right? We've just kind of discussed, or at least, relatively high level about how we both think he's probably not going to be the starter here next year. He'll be a backup, and getting him more experience is important. But is that value outweigh, maybe giving guys on the team an opportunity to showcase themselves in a way, or kind of position themselves for free agency, or help EB maximize the league's view of what he's done here in terms of his effectiveness of the offense? And so those are the types of things that I kind of think behind the scenes maybe are conversations that are happening where it's like, I want to make sure that we show that, Jahan's a good football, or whatever those things are.
Jahan was the guy that I was thinking about, right? Because like we make this argument for Sam of like, well, we got to get him the most experience and the best, most meaningful experience. And I'm like, well, we just talked about how he's probably not the starter. Like, Jahan is a former first rounder who is 100% going to be a starter for you, whether it's as the 2 or the 3 in the slot. Like, slot receivers are going to play 80% of the game. So do you value the opportunity for Jahan to have a confidence builder going into the offseason and try to get him the ball a little bit more and know that Jacoby's the better option to do that? Like, I could certainly make that argument.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, and that's kind of where I'm at with it. Like, yes, Sam is a thing, and I want Sam to grow and develop because I like Sam. Like we've talked about his talent and his upside potentially, but I also want to, if he's inhibiting the offense to a point where you can't get a good evaluation on them, it's kind of the same thing when Ron took over as DC. It went from basically like, I was kind of like, man, like they've had a ton of work to do this offseason. They've got all these pieces. No one's playing well. To now, Ron's taken over as DC, and all of a sudden, you're like, oh man, like Cody Barton's playing well, Khaleke Hudson's playing well. Oh, look at Quan, he's got something too. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden, the total landscape of the defense totally changed. Is that what's going to happen when Jacoby plays? And all of a sudden, you're like, wow, EB was coaching way better. EB had more solutions. Jahan is actually creating more separation than we thought. The O-line's playing better than we thought, emphatically, like whatever. And that's the thing. If that's true, which I don't know, there's nothing that I have that says that is true or not true, then I want to see Jacoby play. Basically is what it comes down to. And I don't think Jacoby's going to help them win the game necessarily more than Sam. I think it's going to be a tough look either way. But I do think if it's going to help with the evaluation of the offensive roster, then I think that's something you should definitely do.
Yeah. If you're Jacoby, here's the sinister part. Like, if you're Jacoby, do you want to? Right now, you've got 5 drives, meaningful drives. You had 6 drives total, the last one of which you were just trying to kill the clock. You handed the ball off 3 times, and then the Jets got the ball back and won the game. Whoopsies. But in the 5 drives, you were told, hey, go operate the offense. You've scored 5 touchdowns.
Yeah,
you have everyone in the building saying how great of a teammate you are, that you were essential, all this stuff. Everything about you right now is as positive as you can make it. Do you want to go out there and play? And by the way, Jacoby represents himself, and so he's got to make the decision all by himself. He can't talk to his agent. There's no nefarious agent play here. It is purely Jacoby making this decision. Or are you just like, I'm good, man. Like, Jake Fromm can put his helmet on again. Me and my hamstring are going to get to this offseason healthy, and I'm good.
So, obviously you want him to be healthy, but I've heard some crazy stories from guys that I've known who've played in New England and know him pretty well, basically saying that like there was one year where he basically had a broken bone in his throwing hand, and everyone was like, he should probably sit down. But Jimmy Garoppolo was also hurt was something that was, in their opinion, was significantly less serious. And Jacoby played, and no one knew about it. Like, so I think Jacoby is a consummate pro, an ultimate teammate. It's one of the reasons you brought him in. And I think it would take a lot for him to kind of go that more conservative route and basically be like, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to rest on my resume. I think that's why people like him, because he does stuff like that. And I respect that as a former player. And, there's a business element to it, and I want him to look out for himself, but also I don't think, at least in my limited interaction with him, and from things I've heard, obviously, I don't think he's wired that way.
Yeah. I think the other thing too that people underrate is you only get so many chances to play. And like Terry talked about this after the game. Like, he's like, right now, I know what the score is, but I only get so many chances to play. And like, I want to go out and I want to play football. And like, you as an NFL, and you know this far better than I, like, you don't know how long you get to play NFL football. It is incredibly rare. It's incredibly special. And to sit out games, and like they've talked about this, NBA guys, with some of the rest management stuff. LeBron even, he's like, look, I know I'm me, but like, I only get so many chances to do this, and I want to play every single night because I want to play NBA basketball. Right. And I think for football, it's even more rare. You got the 17 games. For a guy like Jacoby, like, there's no guarantees that he's going to be a starter ever.
I remember.
So if he gets a chance, like, let's go.
To your point, though, like, I remember talking to guys like, your Mayos of the world, or your Reed Dowdys, Will Compton, me. And it was like, oh, I love playing in the preseason because I actually get to play the position I'm here for, as opposed to special teams. And I think there is something very intoxicating about that in a way that people have a really hard time understanding. Like, I get to play the position that I haven't played for the last 16 weeks because this other guy's been playing. And like, I remember in 2011, like, there was an injury. I think Cooley and Fred both got hurt, and I got to play the last 4 games. And it was like, I didn't care that we had, we were 5 and whatever we were. We weren't going to make the playoffs. We were totally done. But like, I was frothing at the mouth, and so was everybody else, because it was a bunch of guys who had been on practice squads and done stuff. So I think there is something to that. It'd be interesting. And I think Jacoby kind of probably feels that same way.
Yeah, I mean, he's at a different stage in his career and his life, obviously, now than he was with the young guy in New England trying to prove himself. But something to keep in mind for sure for him and others going into Week 18. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen, wrapping up our film breakdown. We will take a look at some of the front office structure stuff later in the week that we mentioned earlier in the pod, as well as get you ready for the final game of the regular season on Thursday's show. In the meantime, Logan, real quick, let's wrap up with some thoughts on the defense. PFF says everybody was not good. It was a rough day at the office for Washington on that side of the ball, which I think, in a way it's like, hey, they held him to 27. Nice job. And that's with 2 picks from Sam, obviously. But to me, the thing that I think is most important, not to go to something negative and just feel like we're piling on here, but the pass defense has gotten better, no blown coverages, and like, you can evaluate a lot of guys. The inability to stop the run this year, I think, is so incredibly disappointing, especially given the 2 guys in the middle that are supposed to be able to kind of put a pin in that. And I think that ultimately is obviously their huge Achilles heel on Sunday, is while they did a bunch of other stuff that they haven't done this season way better than they've done it, and they continued to grow since Ron took over as DC, the run defense hasn't gotten any better. And whenever San Francisco wanted to, they were able to get however many yards they needed. And ultimately, like, that's why you don't have a chance realistically in the game. Yeah,
no, I think that's ultimately the crux of it, right? Is that San Fran they just were awesome running the ball. They just had 11 guys that wanted to impose their will on the defense. And I do think that while that is a huge negative, that the run game has been tough. I go back to the LA Rams game too. That was a tough game in terms of stopping the run. I just think, like, it's good to see them playing hard. There's that 4th and 1 on the goal line. Like, honestly, like, if they score, does it really matter? And those guys are fighting their tails off down there with about 5 minutes left in the game. And I just think there's something cool about that. Something that, to get those guys motivated, they make a couple 3rd down stops in the red zone, holding the field goals. Like, great job. And that's just a different group to me in terms of mentality. And again, like, I agree with PFF. Dudes are getting blocked. Dudes are getting pushed off the ball. but I didn't feel like there was any quit in anybody. There was no lack of physicality. It's just like, that's a really good team, and that's a really good run game. It's a very nuanced rushing attack. And you saw, and it was something that we knew they were going to have a hard time dealing with. But yeah, I'm a little bit more positive. Again, like, I can't point to one person and say this person played really well, because they didn't, right? Like, it was I think from a coverage standpoint, they've improved tremendously, right? And part of that is Ron's playing more conservative coverage structures. He's like, they're out there in a lot of 2-shell stuff. They're keeping stuff in front of them, but that makes it harder to fit runs. And this is what you got to deal with in the NFL. So again, like, I agree with you. I think there wasn't like anything dramatic in terms of analysis. Like, the 49ers are very good at running the football. We knew they were very good at running the football. It was going to be a tough day at the office for that defense. And I thought they did some good things, but I also think we have to be realistic about who that group is at this point of the year. And So,
and in fairness to them, like, realistic about who San Francisco is. They do this to basically everyone except for Baltimore, who seems like they're on another level than literally every other team in the league right now.
Which is interesting. They didn't even try to do it to Baltimore, which I went back and watched that game. They came out throwing the ball a ton. Like, it was really interesting to see that, like, how they were like, this game, they were like, nope, we're getting back to who we are. We're getting back to this. We're going to take some stuff off of Brock Purdy's plate, as opposed to the Baltimore game where their first 5 plays were basically in gun and empty, which is kind of a departure from who they normally are.
Yeah. And, Purdy was awesome in this game, super efficient, and not like he did anything super spectacular, but I think he was 22 of 28. But
that touchdown to Ayuk was incredible.
The
ball placement on that one over Forbes was incredible. Forbes is in a pretty good spot there. And he did a good job.
Yeah, so that was what I was going to ask you about, is like, okay, so Forbes is kind of the guy that we have had circled and watching closely on defense. He was in positions for a couple. I mean, he loses Ayuk on the scramble drill touchdown. That's not great, but it's also a really tough play. And you on the fault list, you go defensive line first. Hey, let's get some pressure there. Let's not let him create for 7 seconds and be able to throw the ball all the way back across the field. But how did you think Forbes played?
I think I've heard some stuff. I think Keim was not as high on him, but I come out of the game, and again, my quarterback evaluation standard is very low in terms of this. Like, are you in good position? Are you playing competitive football? Are you willing to tackle? There were some times where I felt like he wasn't, but I thought the positioning, the competitiveness, the stuff at the catch point was all stuff that we were hoping to see. And Brandon Ayuk is playing good football this year, and Emmanuel Forbes was in his pocket. And so that's like the best you can ask for, in my opinion, from this game. And again, talk about a guy that we've mentioned this before. I think we mentioned this on the pregame show. Imagine if he had been playing more football earlier in the year, and it kind of the way that they had treated Sam, they had treated Forbes. Like, you're going to take your lumps. We're going to get through this, but you're going to get better. And I think this game for him, not being his first game like the last 4 or 5 weeks, would play and probably be a little bit different. Because the other thing I look at is, again, I like St. Juste. I think he's competitive in terms of being in good phase, but he doesn't have great ball skills and ball awareness and coordination to the ball. And Forbes does. And you can see how that advantage for him is right there. Like, the ability to get a finger on that one by Ayuk is a great job. And I just want to see him grow and develop. Another guy that I just want to call attention to is Quan. He's playing in the box. He's playing in the post. He's playing 2-shell. He's playing Buffalo nickel. Like, he just did so much stuff, and I love the intensity that he plays with. Like, I think it was the first play of the second half, or maybe of their second drive of the second half. I don't remember exactly. But, he comes down and nails George Kittle and separates the ball from George Kittle. And, like, that physicality and that energy that he had getting up after that, I think that's a piece. We talk about competitiveness and toughness, and every week he's shown that he's got something like that. And so, as much as those pieces, those picks were kind of maligned, I do think they are pieces that you can build around potentially because of that.
I agree.
Especially Quan.
I would say for Quan, like, real quickly, this is something that we'll talk about more in the offseason, and we can flesh out and do some tape review and all that kind of stuff. Like, what is he moving forward? Like, is he this chess piece that you move around a bunch in the way that they are doing here? Or would you be like, no, he is excelling at this position, and I would put him there for the long term, obviously depending on who the DC is?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, when Forrest comes back, when Percy comes back, you've got 2 safeties that I think are trending in the right direction. You know, I think Percy had some issues earlier this year, so I think you feel good about that. Cam, obviously. So I think that Buffalo nickel spot feels like a home for him. Again, just because he's way more, he was physical. I knew that in college, but he's way more physical in the NFL than I thought he would be. And so I think he accommodates that position really nicely. He draws tough coverage matchups, like he covers Kittle one-on-one in the game. He covers Deebo Samuel one-on-one. And to have a guy who can fit runs, be physical, but also cover that way, I think that's a pretty good spot for him. And now we'll see how that develops over the course of the offseason and with the new defensive staff and what they want their identity to be. But again, he's not graded perfectly by PFF's metrics, but he's definitely a guy that you're like, wow, like he flashes to me each and every time that they're playing football, which is exciting. And again, this conversation started with Forbes, and I think Forbes has done a nice job, did a fine job in the game and showed some of the stuff that makes him the first pick in the draft. But my one criticism, I just wish he played more football.
Yeah, which is something we talked about on the post game. For whatever it's worth, Quan was PFF's second best player for the Commanders on Sunday. Christian Holmes actually was the first before he obviously exited with that scary concussion. All right, that is our show for today. When we return, it will be for the Thursday pod, whatever that looks like this week. I don't know how much time we'll spend previewing Cowboys and Commanders, but as mentioned, we will do some of the front office structure stuff and kind of, you know, who on some of these lists could be in what position. Because I actually think, as much as we talk about GM and coach, I think we're looking at 3 hires, not 2. So a team president as well, and kind of how that infiltrates the organizational philosophy, yada, yada. So we can explain that much more than a yada, yada throwaway on Thursday. Until then, have a great week. I'll see you on the radio. Logan will see you on Command Center over on the Commanders YouTube page, and make sure you follow him on Instagram at Logan_Paulson82. Subscribe wherever you are watching or listening right now if you have not, because you're going to have to pick up your phone and go to the next podcast anyway. See ya. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.